Welcome to this audio session recording taken at the Agroforestry Show, which was organised in September 2023 as a partnership between the Woodland Trust and the Soil Association. For more session recordings, go to agroforestryshow.com or explore and subscribe to the Agroforestry Show YouTube channel. Enjoy!
And so in the mid-90s, we started commercial free range, 9,000 birds, and there was never any out. Then over a couple of years, we were the biggest. We also started packing eggs ourselves as well with a little egg packing company. It was Kitchen Table when it started, to be fair. It's probably grown to packing 500 million eggs a year now. But it's, point of the story was, we're the biggest free-range, specialist free-range egg company in the country, and there was no hens out. A day like today, beautiful sunny day, no hens out. Hens don't like open spaces. They're a timid animal. Everybody, foxes, buzzards, eats you. So, and one tree in the field, you would see there's hundreds of hens under it. So we thought, well, we'll plant a few trees just so it was image, effectively, just to make sure that as a free-range egg company, we actually had hens out. And so we started planting trees in 1997. And it's been an ever-moving feast since, I guess. There's never 1 year since that we haven't not changed how we plant trees. So it's been an interesting journey. But we've got there. We've probably planted 250,000 trees on our own supply farms. That's our own farm, 20,000, 30,000. Then there's 80 other farm suppliers now, and they all plant trees as part of their contracts to supply us with egg. And it's, for poultry, it's a no-brainer. Other livestock species, you can argue there's downsides. There's no downsides with chickens. It's just everything's an upside. You make more money, they're producing more eggs. So any sort of environmental, biodiversity, sustainability proving business case that makes you money is always good, because most of them you end up spending year after year after year replanting things that don't grow in agricultural land.
Amen.
So that's us.
Yeah. Thank you. Guy probably needs no introduction, but I'm going to make him do one anyway. But for the uninitiated Guy, will you tell everyone who you are and your, I think, fairly recent foray into nuts anyway. Yeah. Tell us about the nuts.
Guy Singh Watson. I started growing vegetables at Riverford almost 40 years ago, and I ended up in growing vegetables is probably for the soil about the worst thing you can do, and I'm going to contentiously even say that growing them organically can be even worse, because you end up cultivating a lot to get rid of the weeds and so on, and this, over my 35 years, I became increasingly aware that I suppose just being organic wasn't good enough, and we had a catastrophic soil loss incident about 5 years ago, which was the final tipping point. Even when I started farming, I was kind of influenced by the permaculture kind of philosophy, but I guess I got led away from that by the commercial constraints that we all as farmers have to face the reality of. Anyway, yeah, so we're looking for a better way of producing food, good quality food for people that didn't involve so much disturbance of the soil. And I have become a bit obsessed with perennialising our food supply chain. Part of that has been growing more perennial vegetables. Part of it has been foraging for wild garlic in woods. Part of it has been growing now. We've got about 30 acres of agroforestry, nuts, hazelnuts and walnuts with cattle grazing in between. And the farmers that supply us have got 2 or 3 times that area. And probably pertinent to this discussion, I've certainly lost money hand over fist at it. But our other suppliers, and I've funded it all myself, our other suppliers have been funded by Riverford's box customers, basically by a scheme that if you recommend a customer to us, we'll plant a tree for you and that other customer, which is a much cheaper way of marketing than paying Google or Facebook, or other more conventional ways of marketing, and has worked really well and has paid for this whole scheme. In food chains, the people who sell the stuff always make all the money. They have the power and they make the money, and those who produce it get screwed. I do think some sort of branded, it's just an inevitability. It's like Newton's apple falling off the tree, I think. That we as farmers will get paid less and less for our produce. When I started, it was typically 38% for vegetables if you sold through a supermarket. Went to the farmer, it's down to about 25% now. And I don't think we should ever kid ourselves that it can't go any lower, because it can, and it will, unless we change, unless we can form a relationship with our customers, which is what I think Riverford has been very good at, and it's what all supermarkets do their very best to avoid happening. We all want to know where our food comes from. So you go into Tesco's, and what do you get? They could tell you where it was coming from, which farm, but no, they'll make up their own farm. Willow farms for chickens, table birds, complete fantasy. This bird walking across, the landscape, when in reality it's living in a shed with barely the size of an A4 paper to live on. So, instead we have this sort of fantasy that and we've got to just stop this bullshit as farmers and stand up and, make sure that we can tell the story about how food is produced. So I think this, is a very good topic, and I think for agroforestry, it is definitely a much more environmentally friendly way of producing food. And, and we should be making sure that the extra that people would be prepared to pay for that a fair proportion of that comes back to farmers, and that will not happen if it turns into a commodity.
Just tipping off from that, can I just ask, because it's really funding agroforestry, there was a session about it yesterday, it's complicated, we can go into the finances later on, but I didn't know that you had funded it through the book scheme. So how many trees do you reckon you've planted just by getting customers to refer another one?
I'm looking around the room to see if Harriet's here, but I don't think she is. It's maybe 15,000.
Oh my gosh!
But
right.
I mean, that is, when you. I hate it when people talk about numbers of trees. I think we should be much more, areas covered, because a walnut, will cover. The one I planted 30 years ago is now about 13 metres across. So you're planting at much lower densities. And it's not the number of trees that determine the amount of carbon sequestered. It's the biomass of the tree.
Yeah.
So, I don't think we should get too hung up on numbers.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, well, I was going to ask everyone kind of what their tipping point was, their light bulb moment that made them pivot into this. But before I let you off, Guy, you said something interesting about a catastrophic soil event quite recently, by the sounds of it.
Yeah, I used to kid myself that growing vegetables on our Devon slopes was okay so long as we really maintained a good open soil structure and had high percolation rates. And I would say for the first 20 years of my career that was a fair argument. And actually, I saw the worst soil movement on the shallower slopes in the valleys where the structure was poorer and we got less quick percolation of rain. But this was a summer rainfall. It wasn't a particularly catastrophic thunderstorm. We'd been preparing this field actually to sow a green manure, having grown early lettuces on it. It was a south-facing slope, one of my favourite fields actually. And it was about a 1 in 4 slope, so very early south-facing. Yeah, waiting for some rain to sow the green manure, and then we had a thunderstorm. And the main sin was actually not just the slope, but it was that it was a 400-metre fetch from top to bottom. And we lost very little at the top, but by the time it got to the bottom, we lost about an inch of soil averaged over. But it wasn't across it all. It was gullies where, a foot was gone. And it ended up in the road below, and on our neighbour, who hates me.
I don't think you're unique in that position, but yeah.
Has every time I see him, he brings this up, and, so quite apart from my, just dreadful feeling that I've done a bad thing, I regularly have to be humiliated by my neighbour by the fact, you think you're good for the environment, look what you've done, sort of thing. But anyway, yeah, so that was the thing that finally... I had already planted some orchard. I was trying to grow artichokes while establishing a sidewalk. We were kind of playing around with it. That was the thing that made me get serious. Yeah.
And Charles, you said something really interesting about... I'll let you tell the story yourself, but the fact that you kept finding eggs under trees, and was that your tipping point that thought this is mad? Why isn't everyone doing this? Chickens need trees. Oh, David! Oh, I've already cancelled Charles. Sorry. Charles is cancelled. David, sorry. I'm sorry.
I think what has been really useful for us is getting science to prove what we're doing.
Okay, so where's that come from?
A big global food service company that we supply, McDonald's, funded some research work with Farm Animal Initiative down in Oxford. And that was to show that the we wanted to get more for our eggs, we had to show that the benefit was there. And so we put science into it, and that showed that you get less mortality, better quality eggs, better performance, and gradually over the years we did more bits of science that show that the biodiversity goes up. That was a Woodland Trust. So if you can talk from a scientific, solid background, it's not wishy-washy, oh, isn't this nice, don't the trees look nice? It's, you will make £10,000 more this year on your poultry unit than you would have done without them. And that's really powerful. That was a big tipping point for us, really, I think, to show that what we were doing was right, and we could convince other people it was right as well.
And Helen, you talked a bit about tenant farming and how this is difficult to go into if you're on a tenancy. Do you think that's a blocker to get involved in this?
Well, I think it will hopefully become less of a blocker. So I think, we had a really great session on that in here yesterday, and I think everybody's trying to move to make sure that tenancy law doesn't get in the way, or those tenant relationships don't get in the way of being able to do the right thing now, because I think it's really in landowners' interest not to see trees as the kind of enemy of farming, which is the way it's been for quite a long time, but to see them actually as a way of improving the resilience of the farm. And, when I look up at our downland farm and the rest of the land here, I just wish now that we had been able to, or we had, it's not just about the landlord relationship, actually, it's very much about the grants and the encouragement and all the rest of it that we haven't really had around integrating trees into our farming systems. That is all changing. Today is an example of that. But if only now, we're milking a lot of cows up on the downs, which is a fantastic place for them. But, we know that these extreme weather events are going to get more and more and more. And just as David said about the chickens, there's good evidence now that if you've got dairy cows heat stressed, you'll lose 15-20% of your milk production. That's real money. So we've got to be starting to think that these extreme events are going to be happening more and more, that our animals are going to be so much better off, better welfare, but also better productivity if we can provide them with shade and shelter. And so putting in where we've started putting more hedges in up on that, what Natural England call a naturally barren landscape. I just think there's some real questions around whether we should be looking at any landscape. There are places where one shouldn't be planting trees, but there's an awful lot of places where there's a sort of bit of a prejudice, just because we haven't had trees there for the last, couple of hundred years, to think that they are not, they're not appropriate for those landscapes. So we're starting to put hedges and shelter belts in up there, but it's a big job to do, and I wish we'd started 25, 30 years ago, because then we'd be benefiting from them right now. So loads of evidence coming through. Lamb mortality lower if you've got shade and shelter, if you're lambing outside in the spring. Lots and lots and lots of good husbandry reasons why to plant trees, even before you get into all the products we can then take from them and start to build markets around. So I think things are changing, but it has been an issue on a lot of tenanted ground for quite a long time, that it just hasn't moved nearly as fast as it should have done.
Just picking up on that last point, and moving it to the choice of varieties, what you're planting, because I think you said it was production-led rather than market-led, you're thinking in the beginning.
Yeah, so, I suppose when we started down here, we did go a bit mad and think, look, I wanted, a bit like Guy, I was kind of struggling to find really good examples at a commercial scale. Yeah. And knowing that, that this was going to be a big part of the picture going forward, I wanted to use the opportunity I had on this farm and the fact that I was bringing in an income from my work at the Soil Association to allow us to invest actually in something that wasn't going to give us a return for probably 10 years, being realistic, and I wanted to test lots of stuff. We wanted to experiment with lots of things. So some of what we've done is very much about experimenting. So things like the browsing blocks and some of the stuff we're doing in Barnfield with lots of different varieties of different trees and shrubs and different ways of doing that. And some of it, I thought, right, what's going to be... and this is one of the challenges, I think, with setting up an agroforestry system. You have to try and predict what the market's going to want, in 15 or 20, or if you're into timber, longer years' time. And that's really challenging. We know we should be going at this saying, right, okay, what does the market need, and therefore what should we now be planting? But you have to take a bit of a punt in most instances. So our big commercial planting here is Perry pears. And that was because, there was a demand. We could get a contract right then, 5-10 years ago, for those pairs, even though they weren't going to be ready for another 10 years. And it was something that we thought even if that didn't work out for some reason, there was a real, gap in the market. And if we had a really big supply of Perry pears, then hopefully we would be ahead of the game, because there aren't many in the country. So it was a little bit of, it looks like there's a niche, there is a demand now. If we plant now, then we're ahead of the game. So Perry pears became our big commercial crop. And alongside that, a sort of secondary punt, really, at a bigger scale, has been sea buckthorn. As a fast-growing shrub with amazing antioxidant properties, starting to be used in cosmetics, in preservatives, all sorts of things, in nutrition. And so we thought, no, there's something that will come to market a bit faster and give us some income within 3 to 4 years rather than 20 or 30. So that was kind of the way we looked at it. So some experimenting. And some of what we did, particularly in Barnfield over here, was very much geared to our pub and hospitality and shop on the farm, small quantities that would be relatively inefficient to harvest. If you were looking at it strictly commercially, you would think, well, that's not a very efficient way to do things. But actually, it worked in with our pub and hotel wanting to produce more and more of what we're selling to people from the farm itself. And then some stuff which is which is at a bigger, more commercial scale. So, were we right, were we wrong? Where do we go next? We've got still big plans to do a lot more. I'm like Guy, kind of really interested in the nuts thing. I think nuts have got so much potential because, when you look at the yields of sort of fat and protein from an acre of nuts, it outstrips livestock by quite a long way, in theory. Oh, yeah.
Right.
So, if we're looking at feeding people, if you're looking at how do you square the circle between the lower levels of yield that we get in organic systems, particularly in our organic arable, with the need to kind of maintain food production and diversify it, then trees help you square that circle, because the overall productivity of that acre of land is significantly higher. But then you've got to look at all the efficiencies of, harvesting. Is there processing infrastructure, building the kind of products and brands and all that kind of stuff? And at the moment, we're doing all of that in-house. So, it's when I said I'm production-led, I wanted to kind of have a go at growing trees in these systems. We had to take a bit of a punt. We've done some stuff that's pretty speculative, and it's probably not the way the marketing textbooks would tell you to do it.
Well, leaving the marketing textbooks aside, with the benefit of reflection, how good do you think your crystal ball gazing was? Like, would you change it now, looking back, what you planted, whether it's the Perry pears or the buckthorn?
It's too early to say in some ways,
Okay.
but because some of those trees aren't through yet, and we're not making products from them yet.
Okay.
But I think actually I don't regret the Perry pears decision. I think that still feels great. They're going to be fantastic big trees. They'll be amazing in the landscape, in another 10 years' time, and I think we can do something with the fruit. And then, in lots of the other areas, I look at my long-suffering colleague, Vicky, in the audience, who runs our sales and marketing business, develops all the products. A lot of the time, we're having a quick chat. She says, okay, what have you got coming through? What do I need to make for you to use this stuff that you're producing? And so, when we see what's working, we then think, right, okay, let's make a product. So the blackcurrants really like it on this heavy clay soil. So we've just launched the blackcurrant,
Well done.
spirit. And now we're thinking, okay, what else is growing well? What else has she got to go and make something out of? So that's why we're doing it the wrong way round, but I don't regret any of it as yet.
Long way that continue. David, you're in a slight different position to Helen, because she, of course, had all the direct access to the market set up with the farm shop and lots of footfall and so on. What did you look at when you were deciding what varieties to plant? And would you change your mind about any of the ones that you did?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Big mistakes. But circumstances are the big mistakes, really. Different approach. We're not using the crop of the tree to make the money. The tree per se is the thing that makes the chickens behave better and produce better. So it's a different viewpoint.
Yeah.
From that point of view, that very, very much then again becomes a marketing thing, though, and we're major suppliers to major retail. And a lot of their viewpoint now is towards sustainability and biodiversity and that sort of thing. So we've very much gone down the what grows in the area and grow the same. What is going to provide as a side effect of the benefits to the chickens to biodiversity and sustainability in the area. So it's traditional, it's oaks, and here's where the big bloomer was. We planted it. We're a WA upland limestone woodland. So we planted, that's about 30% ash. So we planted thousands of ash. Not a good decision. but there you go. You learn. And the other thing we did, we took to what the sort of Forestry Commission planting is, and you plant them in groups. So when a group of ash go, you get a big hole in your planting. We don't, and we're planting on grade 3 agricultural land mainly, so they all grow. They grow like weeds. Once you put a tree in, that sort of, it's not like you put them up a mountainside. So you don't need to plant them in groups to make sure that one or two survive. So there's things we would change, but it's different. It's anything, what will be good for the biodiversity in that area.
Yeah.
And then it's changed recently. Like I said, the planting plan changes every year practically. In the last 5 or 6 years, we're looking at ammonia absorption. So trees can absorb carbon, of course, everybody knows that, but they're also very good at absorbing ammonia. So if you plant them downwind of your chicken sheds, and fast growers such as poplar and hybrid willow near the chicken shed, because the bigger leaf index trees absorb more ammonia, you can get away from the sort of artificial scrubbers and concentrated sulfuric acid and electric and all that sort of stuff. Let the tree do the work. Haven't sold that to the Environment Agency yet. It's a bit of a sore point with me because they won't accept it yet, but because it takes 10 or 15 years to develop that capacity.
So there's no research about that at the moment, but
there's lots of research.
Okay.
10 down the road last night, it's Alana at Forest Research doing a lot of work on that sort of stuff, but it's just getting the Environment Agency to accept it.
Right.
We left Europe. So
that worked out well, didn't it?
A lot of the policies, they're all European, so the best available technique is blow the ammonia as high in the air as you can with a high velocity fan. And we haven't been able to change that. Basically give it to everybody else instead of trying to keep it on your own site and absorb it with your trees. So it will come, but it's just going to take time.
Guy, how about you? Do you regret any of the varieties that you put in?
Too early to say, really. I mean, trying to unpick the effect of exposure, wind, big issue.
Right.
Varying soil quality, the quality of the plants that when they arrived, how they were planted, how they were looked after, and then variety. There's so many things that could be contributing to the differing performance. But so far, the walnuts look very promising, despite the fact the soil we planted them on. You do any research and they'll tell you need 2 meters of unimpeded drainage, perfect soil to grow a walnut. I certainly don't think that's true. And just seeing how other walnuts have grown, it may be because we're in a different climate. Of course, we're borrowing crops that are generally grown 500 miles further south in drier climates, and kind of anticipating climate change, what they're going to be like in their kind of 100-year life. And it'll take 30 years for the walnuts to get to full production. And I think we probably are going to be in a very different climate. And Martin Crawford, who advised me on the varieties, I got whatever advice I could, but he was probably the most helpful. He's a permaculture forest garden specialist in Devon. Incredibly knowledgeable. He recommended the varieties, and I took his advice, and I think it was pretty good, actually. But I feel very confident about the walnuts. The hazelnuts, and you can see the walnuts now, they're just about a third of them are what I would call sort of popping when they just suddenly go.
Cool.
And they some of them have put on 1.5 meters in the last 3 months, this is a minority of trees, I have to say. I could show you photographs of some lovely trees that are really going for it, and then some other ones which are still fairly stunted. But I have a kind of confidence, which I probably inherited from my father, who always used to tell my mother, "Darling, I really think we're getting there." And I do think, I do think that the other trees this time next year, I think the majority of the walnuts we get. I'm much less confident about the hazels. I think the hazels, looking around at how they grow, it's mostly lowlands. It's in the hedges. They really don't like being out in a field on their own. Could this be the mycorrhizal communication, or is it just the wind? I don't know, but I've got to say, they don't look happy. So I'm less optimistic there.
Interesting. You've talked us through how you've managed to fund it, because part of the barrier, I think, to going into these enterprises is the initial upfront cost, knowing that you're not, as Helen has said, already going to realise anything from it for potentially 5-15 years. David, in your circumstance, unlike Guy's, how did you go about justifying the expense of putting it in? Or was it a kind of, because we're doing it gradually, we can afford it?
Initially, it was on our own farm, and we always use our own farm as a research vehicle for all the other farmers that supply us, so we don't throw them down under the bus on a route that's wrong. And we just... It was grant funded to start off with. And that was Forestry Commission grant funded. And that was a bad idea. It was the wrong type of planting at all. They want 2 metre spacings, 2,000 stems per hectare. It was way too tight.
Regimented, yeah.
So we very quickly moved away from that. And we just fund them ourselves now. I think we've shown with the extra profit that you'll make, or benefits to cash flow that you'll make, you can fund them yourself. But it's funny, and then it gets legs. Like I say, we planted, I know you say don't count the numbers, but we had 250,000 trees across our supply farms. Because of the science, it proved there's a welfare benefit. The RSPCA Assured, which all the egg industry, 95% of the egg industry in the UK are members of, put it in the code of practice because it's a welfare benefit. So now there's 1.5 million trees planted on free-range chicken farms all over the country because of that one piece of research. It was something I never thought about at the time, but actually now you need to think about that because now you know it happens. There's all sorts of other stuff that we never look at with trees. Willows, full of oxalic acid, which is a painkiller. It's aspirin, effectively. And we don't explore that. Walnuts, they keep the flies down. So around poultry sheds, you can have fly problems. If you can plant a walnut tree instead of wandering around with insecticides, there's all sorts of things we need to be looking at other trees and how we can employ them in agriculture to our benefit.
So you're saying that apart from the fact that you shouldn't factor in the initial cost, there will be accidental benefits all the way through in lowering inputs elsewhere, more or less.
Has been so far. Yep.
Yeah, that is really interesting. Helen, how about you? Because did you do it? You just took the plunge and paid for it.
Well, we did some and some. So, if you are doing conventional, hedge planting, you can get grants for that. When we did native woodland recreation, which we're going to hopefully use as living barns for the cattle in the longer term, you could get grants for that. For the riparian strips along the stream, we could get grants for. What you couldn't get grants for were putting agroforestry trees in the middle of the fields. So there's the alley cropping of the Perry pears, the stuff we've done in Barnfield. There still aren't grants available for that. So we harvested what we could for the kind of more conventional stuff, but the less conventional agroforestry, we did self-fund. We did what I'd never done before in my life. We did a 50-year cash flow and provisional profit and loss, looking at how that should play through over that kind of period of time. And, in theory, the numbers all stacked up. So the challenge for farmers is that upfront investment and the cash flow lag until you've got product coming off. And that's where I think, we're now told that as part of the SFI, we will have an agroforestry scheme next year. And that, if that pays for that and helps farmers over that initial investment, it would be hugely helpful, because I could take a bit of a punt, but most farmers can't. And we need to be able to kind of lock down that initial investment to try and find a way to get the ball rolling. And then obviously you can start to look at what you're likely to be able to get from the system financially over time. So I think some of them are the productivity benefits of livestock. Some of them, for us, it's very much more about what are these trees going to produce and how are we going to be able to market that. And there always will be some unknowns when you're trying to predict markets, as I said earlier on, 10, 15, 20 years out. But I think that if we can get an agroforestry grant to help farmers with that initial capital investment and the fencing and protection of those trees and the management of them in the first 5 years, that would be hugely, hugely helpful and would unlock, I think, a lot of planting on farms now.
Well, quite. I just want to move into the kind of idea of marketing a brand, so making it into a product and how you actually go about moving it from idea to a till. What has been your kind of biggest challenge and what's been your biggest break? Because you've got a lot of experience in doing different, as well as your gin, you've done different stories along the way.
So I mean, historically, our sort of added value products have been livestock based. So particularly pork, we were famous for our pigs for a long time, and most of our products still in the market are pork products, and then beef, and we've done other livestock species over time. So it's all been about a livestock based brand. With the trees coming through, then there's new opportunities. Meat is always a really challenging market to be in, to be quite honest. Trying to get carcass balance and all those kind of things right, trying to get production, supply and demand right, has always been a nightmare. But the new opportunities that are coming through from the agroforestry are legion. So I don't think we've yet made the big breakthroughs. Last year we actually launched the gin last year. It's won loads of awards, but that doesn't mean to say we've got any major listings that are kind of going to revolution our business right now. So we haven't made that big breakthrough. It's a great product, but we haven't made the big breakthrough. Maybe the world's got too many gins already. And now looking at these kind of reasonably low alcohol, low sugar, fruit-based spirits feel really exciting because they are fantastic. And the blackcurrant one, which we're launching this week, is super. But we haven't made the big breakthroughs. They're still to come. We're experimenting with products. We want to do lots more. But I won't say I'm not sitting here as a success story on agroforestry brands.
I mean, that is the name of the title of this talk. But yeah.
Well, that's why I said I shouldn't be speaking.
No, that's not true. David, how about what do you think was the kind of big kind of moment when you thought, yes, this is my break, this has worked, I can do this?
Our problem's probably been too much demand for too small a company. And that has been a challenge. The big moment was probably early 2000s. The attitude sort of changed. People were more looking towards sustainability a little bit. It was just starting to become sexy, which it hadn't been up until then.
Yeah.
An example, and it wasn't the company that we're sitting at the moment. One of the big four retailers, we provided a product to them, which is all about nature and biodiversity and trees, and it grew so fast within that company. It was 15% of sales within 2 months.
Wow.
And they very quickly realised their own boxes weren't going off the shelf, and this one was. So they collared it. Because it was a big lump of our business at the time, when they say, we want that brand, we had no choice. So off they went with it.
Nice.
That's a few years ago now, but it was a learning curve.
How can that be legal? Honestly, it's certainly immoral.
Yeah, well, they're not the same thing, unfortunately, are they? I say that as someone who is a criminal barrister for 10 years, so...
Yeah. Because 40% of your business is with that company, they say, we won't give you that brand, but if you don't, when it comes to the next negotiation... So you're in that world, aren't you? So you just have to work with it. Anyway, we'll learn from that one. Sell it to 2 or 3 people, and they can't do that. So the next one that we'll launch that's in there now is actually in with a few retailers, so just one of them can't steal it.
That's very good advice. Yeah.
But it's difficult to supply all of that. It always becomes a challenge. It's a nice challenge to have. Yeah. Too much business, but it's a challenge.
It's a tipping point challenge. Yeah. Guy, how about you? I mean, I realise this probably doesn't apply to the nut enterprise. Or what are you looking at? How you're going to go with it in terms of marketing and making a brand out of it?
I'm doing this in my own right, rather than Riverford is now employee-owned, and I can't tell them what to do anymore, which is
sure they're
a good. But I do have some influence, and I just think. I mean, actually, if you taste a freshly cracked hazelnut, or certainly walnut, compared to anything that you can buy. It's a completely different thing. Every nut that you buy is rancid. So I really think that, if you can just sell them and say that this has been cracked within a week of it arriving on your doorstep. I went to Piedmont, northern Italy, and came back with some hazelnuts, which were vac-packed straight after they'd been cracked. And I guess that's what everyone got for Christmas, with all their other products and everything. And... all my 4 children came back. I just couldn't believe how wonderful they were. So, most nuts that we buy are so dreadful that I think actually just being able to provide a freshly cracked nut, I think there was a freshly cracked nut that's grown in an environmentally friendly way. So, I do think for the amount that I'm going to produce in my lifetime, I do feel pretty confident that Riverford's 100,000 customers will buy them. And they'll buy some in the shell, probably a limited number. If you want to lose weight, just put some cracked nuts on, some nuts in the shell, and there's a limit to how fast you can shove them in your mouth, So that's a really useful. But yeah, what we get then, we'll start cracking them, obviously, and selling them, and then we'll be making, hazelnut paste. I just think, is the food of the gods, and and everyone I've given. So I'm pretty confident they will sell. But Riverford has quite a unique approach to marketing in that we don't believe in choice. We don't believe the customer's always right. And we believe that they're often confused, ignorant, and blinded by the main retailers as to how their food is produced. So if you come to the Riverford Field Kitchen, it's a set menu. If you get a Riverford box, it's their set contents. Okay, there are now 19 boxes to choose between, and unfortunately an increasing number of our customers do want to order bespoke. So there is limits to this theory, but I do think people are up to being, well, at least presenting a curated choice of what you believe to be really good and what you believe can be produced in a reasonably sustainable way. And you know, I just think the nuts are going to tick all those boxes, and we eat pathetic quantities of. You know, it's weird. Another business I'm getting a little bit involved is a huge mussel farm, which I think is about the most sustainable food, and we eat. You know, there's one chain of mussels restaurants in Paris that consumes more mussels than the entire UK. As an example, I mean, and anyway, I'm determined that we're going to persuade people to eat nuts and mussels because they are the most sustainable protein.
Who here would eat a mussel? Oh, look
Good
at
on
that.
you. There you go.
Correct marketing strategy. Talking just a bit of number crunching, because it's all good in theory until you have to make it pay. What were all of your predictions as to when you tip into profit on this?
Well, David's already tipped into profit on this. He's got no problems. So I think different bits of this tip into profits at different times.
Sure.
I think the kind of forest garden stuff on our current model probably tips into profit in about another 3 years, 2 to 3 years. Having been going for, we planted there initially in 2016-17.
Okay.
We're getting product off it, and it depends where you take the profit as well. So if we're looking at it, we are an integrated business. So the farm sells, I sell from the farm to Vicky in her business, which is a sister company within the same thing. So where are you taking the profit? I don't know what Vicky's predictions on when we tip into profit on the drinks might be. Really hard to predict right now. Depends on getting a decent listing somewhere, probably. On the Perry pears, we've got at least another 5 years before we're going to be able to commercially harvest. We'll be picking by hand the small amounts, doing product testing over the next year or two, and I suspect we will have sufficient volume to be mechanically harvesting and starting to bring in. And once we do start to sell off those, it will be largely at the farm level pure profit, because above and beyond the harvesting costs, because all the establishment costs are in there. Yeah. There's no real ongoing maintenance to do beyond a certain point. Okay. So, probably another 5 years on those Perry pears. So it is a bit of a long burn. But I think
for the future. Yeah.
Exactly. So I'm not really helping anybody here, am I?
No, I'm not sure I'm brave enough to do a 50-year P&L. but
I mean, the huge problem I'm imagining Helen is facing as well is the uncertainty. I mean, we are at the very bottom of the learning curve here, for nuts, and I imagine for certainly sea buckthorn, I imagine. But, so how are we going to harvest them economically, because, and I have spent a bit of time travelling around Europe looking at harvesting equipment, but it's all going to have to be adapted. Walnuts are harvested late October, even into November. In Devon, no way you're going to sweep them up off the floor. They're going to, it's going to be wet the whole time. The machinery doesn't work. The slopes are steep. So we're going to have to find different methods of, I think, the kind of way the most olives are harvested is probably how we'll do it. So, there's huge. If you do, I did predict the yield, did my research, how many kilos per tree you would get. And actually, if you take even half commercial yields, you get you're into profit in year 10 to 15. And the walnuts do look like they will be producing an economic crop by year 8, which is what the commercial expectation is. Hazelnuts by year 5, I don't think that's going to happen. But there are just so many uncertainties, and this is why I don't think I could advocate this to one of our suppliers who, I'm lucky enough to have made my money largely by selling vegetables rather than growing them, as everyone does. And being able to put that into this enterprise. But I mean, most farmers just don't have that sort of money and can't take on these sort of risks. So it is going to have to be financed elsewhere, by our customers. I think that's great. I think that's a win-win. you know, we have looked in getting into the slippery snake oil carbon trading thing. But
so you're really happy about that?
We are staying away from that. But that is obviously, so I know a lot of people don't have the privilege of being able to turn their back on that. So for some people, that will have to be how they finance it. And, you know, though I don't like it, if it helps good things to happen, I'm not going to tell anyone, commercial farmer, that they shouldn't do it. So I think that's definitely... But I couldn't believe in the tent that I was told that people... The huge majority of carbon trades are now forward sold. Yeah. When we started investigating this, that was a complete no-no. I don't know how that coin's been flipped over. So we could be selling forward the credits. But I mean, how the hell does anyone know how fast those trees are going to grow and how you can sell... Anyway, don't get me... Yeah, I'll stop there.
There's another session on that, I'm sure. David, I mean, this may be an incredibly naive thing to ask, but Guy's point about the practical difficulties of harvest and how that eats into your profit, does that not apply to your situation? Because I remember you saying at the beginning, you know, we found that chickens were laying under trees, so presumably you have to go and get them.
Yeah, that's not a fact. They don't. As long as you keep the tree... And we learned over 25 years.
Okay.
The bottom branch is near the ground. If you get grass growing up and leaves growing down and get that area that's closed, yes, you get eggs under there because it's a nice calm place to live. Right. So you lift the branches up so they're sort of 1.2 metres each, so you can walk about underneath and it's open underneath. Okay. So you don't get that. Okay. One of the reasons we're planting them in rows is so that you can go in with your tractor and topper and top the bit between the rows to keep the grass down. So they won't do that. But you just have to... there's all these problems. As you see, Paul stood at the back there. He's our forestry advisor we've worked with for 25 years. And I'll come up with another problem from chickens, and he'll come at it from his tree angle as to how we can solve that problem. The profitability thing, we're not counting is... It's easy for chickens because we're in a more mature... We've matured that place now, so we understand the economics of it. So it comes into profit cash-wise very quickly. What you're not taking into account is all the other stuff. Helen has a massive amount of brand awareness coming from the fact she's planting all these trees, even though they haven't produced anything yet. And we don't really count that. And I think we maybe should do. We have a branded product that's around about 15% of our turnover, but actually it reflects across the whole company. So we have to take that into account as well, and I'm not sure we do that always.
I think one of the other things that comes out of this conversation, maybe as a bit of a tangent, is the need for a load more research in this area. And David, you said how vital that research on chickens was to kind of be able to really make the case, the financial case. And a lot of the people in this room and this show here, up here, are doing lots of experimenting. And we need a lot more of this happening in other places too, because it's brilliant if we can have a go ourselves and learn some stuff and share some stuff. Really keen to do that. But what happens in agriculture and in forestry as well follows where the research effort has been put. And so if we want to see this mainstreamed, made more straightforward, made more profitable for many, many more people to come on board, we need to encourage a lot more of the research spend to be on, ideally, farmer-led approaches, supporting farmers to be doing this experimenting. So it's not just being done by those people who are just kind of passionate about this and doing it anyway. So I do think that's kind of, and it's not about branding and it's not about marketing, but it is just a fundamental to make the system work and make sure that you've got the information. I know when we put together the Agroforestry Handbook, 2 or 3 years ago, the challenge was finding really good, worked out commercial examples of, they do this is going to be your income, this is how it's going to work. We need a lot more of that to give people the confidence en masse to get on board.
Who's going to pay for it? Because I had 3 conversations about research yesterday, and of course there's only an incentive to do research if you're going to make money out of it. And so research into all the things which... Because, McDonald's did your research, right? Yeah.
Yeah, but I think that there's a lot of public investment in research, and we would say that a big chunk of that, should be put towards farmer-led approaches that are going to be more sustainable. Because you're right, there's no IP we don't want there to be IP coming out of this. We want everything to be shared and everybody to learn faster. So you need public funding going into this kind of research. There is some now, and Innovative Farmers, the thing that we run, is running a 12-year agroforestry research trial with ORC and others. So there is a little bit, but it shouldn't have to be being done by charitable organisations like ourselves. There should be, and there is starting to be some DEFRA funding for this kind of thing, but we just need to make sure that farmers can access it. It's going to be easy enough to get small grants to get you going, rather than having to be in some socking great consortium and bidding for £10 million. Small grants given to farmers to get on with some of this work is a hugely important part of the jigsaw, and would just release a huge amount of energy really fast. We've run 120 field labs over the last 10, 11 years, and done it on a shoestring by making those grants really easily available to farmers so they can get going. And we just need more of that kind of approach from public funding too.
I'm going to throw it open to the floor in a minute, but before I do, I just want all of you in turn, very briefly, to just tell us the thing that you wish you had known at the beginning that you didn't know when you started. You wish you knew now that you didn't know when you started.
Before we get to that one, the research thing. Yes, McDonald's started with us. Sainsbury's have done quite a bit of funding and still fund that sort of research, so commercial does that. But also there are government agencies that get interested now. Particularly, we've just done a big research project with Natural England on ammonia absorption by trees, because it's a problem. Okay. Dara, Northern Ireland, we're working with them for probably 10 years now on exactly the same problem, because Northern Ireland's sinking under ammonia. So it's, it is funding, we'd only use it to try and solve a problem. Right. Right, what was the question?
What do you wish that you had known when you started that you know now?
We've changed the planting plan. The first thing, the absolute key thing, is don't plant ash trees, because that was a big mistake. But anyway, some of them are still growing. They'll grow. Other than that, I think we learned, if we've gone along, maybe learned. The absolute key thing probably was that farmers ain't foresters.
That's a very good
we've been trying
advice.
to get farmers. Yeah. I didn't know. I talked with Paul, and we're backwards and forwards over the years. He now understands poultry. I understand trees, so that's fine. But a lot of the farmers that we're getting to plant these trees, people assume they grow stuff, so they know how to grow a tree, and it's different. So we make sure in our supply chain that Paul goes every year for the first few years to show people what they should be doing with their trees. Right. They soon pick it up. It's not rocket science, but you just need to do the right things in the right place. Daft little things. Don't take a tree guard off in December, because that's when the frost is and all the rabbits come in. Oh, that's nice bark, nice tender bark. But all our farmers are sheep farmers, and most of them are. So that's a spare bit of the year when you're not really busy, because you're lambing in the spring and your sheep sales earlier than that, so take them off in December. So they take the tree guards off. All these little rabbits who are starving because it's frosty, snowy ground eat the nice soft bark, and kills off 5 years worth of growth. So little things that you learn as you go along that you could add on the list of things that makes mistakes you wouldn't make again. Yeah.
Guy, how about you?
The biggest mistake was, anyway, one of the fields we planted was literally a 1 in 3 slope, and that was just insane. I've turned a tractor over, even turned a tractor vehicle over on it, and it's basically unsafe to send anyone out there with machinery, so that was really pretty stupid. I don't know why I just went for that. I said if I can make it work there, I can make it work anywhere. So let's go for, and that was really dumb. So yeah, I would say a maximum of a 25% slope. I wanted to make it attractive to people, to graziers, and so that's kind of why I did it. And actually, I hope I don't sound arrogant, but I'm amazed by how few mistakes we have made. Actually, the varietal choice, the planting, the protection, all has worked remarkably well, despite the fact these are all kind of novel techniques, and if you do novel things, it is going to go wrong quite often, but remarkably little has, other than tipping the dumper over. And the other thing I would say was ground preparation before planting the trees. I'm guessing your trees are probably a bit more robust, and I would completely agree with, I think I know how to grow vegetables. I can go out into a field and look at vegetables and have a sense for what's going on under the ground and how happy they are and whether they're growing. I think I'm starting to develop that for trees, but I've never looked at them with that sort of detailed eye that I have done over the last, so definitely a steep learning curve about trees. I think ground preparation, I think I could have probably saved myself a year by, instead of just digging a hole out with a mini digger, by actually cultivating a strip and planting into it. I didn't want to do that because that was counter to, that's going to release carbon, destroy biodiversity, and I think, but to cultivate 5 or 10% of the field, I think would have been a worthwhile sacrifice, and I think the trees would have got off to a better start. Oh, don't mulch them with cardboard boxes. That was another one, because it encourages the voles, but...
Everything encourages the voles.
Helen, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, I think like Guy, I don't think as farmers we are ever taught about trees. You know, when you go to farmer school, they teach you nothing about trees. So I actually started from such a low, knowing that it was a good thing and really being enthusiastic, but absolutely knowing nothing. Yeah. And so, what I wish I'd known, I wish I'd had, a forester friend or, been able to kind of get that background much quicker, much earlier. I mean, luckily I had Ben Raskin here, supervising all the plantings and all his knowledge and advice, and other people coming through. But I think that's the biggest challenge for us as farmers. And then there's lots of little stuff around, as Guy says, about, how do you protect the trees? Learning actually that the more wood chip you chuck on a tree when you plant it just saves you so much grief in the medium term. Just how much better the trees grow if they're given that amazing mulching. Doing it organically is also, most people are planting trees, still using glyphosate to keep the weeds at bay for the first few years, and actually it is more expensive and more challenging doing all of this stuff organically. Buying organic plants, sourcing organic trees has been challenging. So I think there's some stuff, more technical stuff, that we've kind of learned as we've gone. We probably would have gone to 2-meter spacing on the alley cropping, so that we, rather than 3, to allow the animals to browse underneath and reduce some of the thistle, population under the trees. Bits of stuff like that. But my basic... I just wish I had a whole load more knowledge 10 years ago. I'm picking up bits as I go along, but that's still the big challenge for us as farmers.
A consistent piece of advice then. Yeah. This chap in the front here.
Hi, Steve Newman. Working with Abacus at the moment. I just want to feed back on this research thing because I think it's very important and very timely. The good news is today it's announced that the British are allowed back into the Horizon system, so we can now work with our European colleagues again on agroforestry issues. That's going to be a major benefit. The second thing is just to give a small plug for the talk at 3:00 this afternoon in the Forestry Commission tent, where we're talking about 40 years research experience, but relevant to the three of you on the stage. The first is 40 years research on hazel and walnut agroforestry and how to optimise that. There's been work on it since the 1920s. That's going to be described.
Great.
Chicken feed, that's an incredibly important topic we're developing from trees, looking at the nutrition thing, so you can blend your own feed and take full control with trees playing a major role. Mulberry is looking incredibly promising, and we're working with lots of drinks people on that at the moment.
Great, so everyone should come to 3:00.
Quince as well, because quince can tolerate soggy conditions. That is extremely special. We're working with corporates on that. So in the riparian zone, fantastic.
Great.
Lots of interesting things on that, and also on scale up to the county level, so how we can facilitate at that level.
I think you should be on this panel next year. Behind you, thank you. Just in the check shirt, just there, please.
Thank you. Really great insight. I was wondering how you are or how you're planning to use agroforestry in your branding imagery or messaging.
Helen. Oh, look, she's got a demo.
Yeah. One I prepared earlier. But all our products are featuring the botanicals that are flavouring them. So this one has got the sea buckthorn on the label, and this one, surprise, surprise, has got the black currants on the label.
Does it say the word agroforestry on the label
Yeah,
at all?
so this one, we've sort of started this little sub-brand called Sylvan Spirits, made with organic fruit from agroforestry. So that is starting to promote the kind of agroforestry element. Whether somebody said to me yesterday, we need to get rid of the agroforestry word because it's not a very sort of consumer-friendly word
hot,
as yet.
no.
But I think it sort of helps. So yeah, really keen to promote the system alongside the product as in the way that we do with organic.
David, I guess it's a bit different for you because you're pitching to the retailers, really. So it's not. Do they put it on the eggs?
They tend to put it on their boxes. I think some of them do anyway.
Do they?
Looking at the tent. On our branded stuff, we do. It's a really complicated message. It's because agroforestry, like you say, nobody understands it. So it's all about biodiversity. It's all about welfare friendly for hens. Your average customer spends 15 seconds in front of the egg counter. So you have to get a complicated message out very simply. Right. So you can't go into all of that detail. It's just got to be a real simple picture of a tree or something. Just so. And most of those customers actually are the 12-year-old who mum has sent off to get the eggs. You know, the ones in the blue box or whatever, while she does something else. It's not a complicated pitch on eggs. So you haven't got long.
Guy, are you going to put pictures of trees everywhere?
I haven't thought about the imagery specifically. I'm sure there could be some great images. Riverford is really unusual in that we don't have 3 seconds. You know, our customers actually, something like a third of our customers have second degrees. It's extraordinary. They're not massively wealthy on the whole, but they are unbelievably questioning and thoughtful about their lives and the food that they put in their mouths. And so I think we have an extraordinary ability and connection. So we can tell them more complex messages, and that's largely through. And I guess I am already using it, writing about it in the newsletter, what's going on. And it's just our marketing is very patient. It's a 30-year campaign to build trust with our customers that we are really trying to do the right thing. And that sort of patient marketing is just unknown to the marketing industry we have today. So and the ability, the thought, that actually, I'd rather say citizens and consumers are not all really stupid. That they can be thoughtful and make intelligent, balanced, nuanced decisions. That we don't live in a black and white world. So yeah, I'm not sure how much can be. I know we're in an incredibly privileged position. I'm not sure how much can be taken from that and used by others. But I do wish that the marketing industry could be a bit more respectful of the people it's aimed at and have a bit more patience sometimes.
Question in the front and then to you, sir, afterwards.
Hugh Richards, mainly a vegetable grower, but far more interested in regen ag, but I can't tell my audience that. I guess my main question is, all of these agroforestry systems, especially if they're being self-funded, they're seen as small-scale agriculture. And so when it's like smaller-scale agriculture, you can't compete at like supermarket level, and I don't think you want to be selling via supermarket. So I think it's very much about partnerships with almost like other brands, because unless you had a distiller in your bedroom, Helen, it's like when you start producing these crops, especially niche crops, and you're getting something within 3 to 5 years, you'll then need another massive injection of cash to then create the infrastructure. So I'd be quite interested about tips with like working with other existing brands who might be making gins or botanicals, etc. So you don't have to fork out so much money.
Yeah, I mean, so I think that's a really good point. Now, we made a decision as a business that we don't manufacture. So when we were in the meat business, we did run factories, 20, 25 years ago, and we realised actually that it wasn't our skill set. We're good at growing stuff potentially. We're good at doing the logistics and sales and marketing potentially, but we've never wanted to invest a lot of capital in production on site because it locks you in to something that you might want to change. And so I'm not particularly keen to suggest that everybody needs to set up their own dairy or their own distillery or their own whatever. So we work with people who make great products. And our job is to find the people who are making great products and then work with them to develop a product for us. And that is a far more efficient way of getting to market if you're starting off small than actually investing and putting all your eggs in one basket, one product basket. It means we can change and flex and work. And some of those partnerships go on for 20, 25 years. It's, they've been extraordinarily fruitful relationships where you're doing NPD together, bringing products to market together, but basically you're doing what you're good at. So those are the kind of partners we've particularly worked on. But I agree, it could be that you want to be supplying into an existing brand that wants to do a new line and what can use your product for it, working with a dairy to put products into their new yogurt or whatever it might be. So all of those opportunities, I just don't think as farmers we're always good at running factories, and the capital required is massive, and sometimes it can really trap you.
Just be a bit careful, though. Don't limit your horizons. Eggs is a classic example, and I may be the ogre on the stage, I don't know, but small is fine, nothing wrong with small and niche. But 80% of the food in the UK is sold by retailers. So if you want to get that out to the market and get to most people, you have to go through retailers. So there is a place. Trees started very small, very niche in the food service industry, really, and then it's spread to retailers, and now it's across the whole retail consortium in the UK.
Guy, did you ever think, because you're in a different position, you had complete control over what? Did you ever think about doing a partnership?
It's interesting listening to Helen. I think she must be a much more trusting person than me. I don't know whether I'm just super controlling. We do everything ourselves. Every time I've worked with an outside supplier, particularly in IT, actually, I've been screwed. And so we do everything. We do all our own distribution, all our own marketing. We develop all our own software. We manage our own database. We do it all in-house. It's a bit of an obsession. We've just recently, we had a logistics company, which was someone that I grew up with, went to school with, and when he retired, we bought that as well. We've just bought back virtually all our franchisees who do the last mile delivery. And I don't know, it's worked very well for us, but Helen is completely right. You are locking yourself into, you're investing in your business as it is today, and that does make you inflexible. But I want to live in a, to solve the world's problems, we have to be thinking much more long term. And I don't know, I feel pretty confident, dangerous, but that our business is fairly stable, and that we can make these investments and do it ourselves. To come to the scale thing and with nuts, I'm absolutely determined that no one will never ever put artisan on a bag of my nuts. I want it to be harvested mechanically, and I want the price to be one that everyone can afford, not just a few. Possibly Charles, who you should be seeing here, is a really good bloke, actually. Anyone who does grow nuts and was looking for a market, I would really advocate him as a good route to market. We may do something. He was on our farm a couple of weeks ago. We may actually do something in partnership and pool our processing. But we're lucky with nuts. You only have to go to Italy, and there are plenty of 10 and 20 hectare specialist nut farms who do everything from harvest, drying, grading, cracking, making into pastes and whatever, and all the machinery is there to be bought. It's pretty affordable for $250,000, which might sound like a scary amount of money, but you can have everything to be producing a finished product, right down to something that you'd stir into your coffee, as they do there. They're so obsessed with their hazelnuts. So I think it is relatively affordable, and I'm pretty confident we will do it ourselves again.
I mean, I think a benign dictatorship under Guy Singh Watson might work quite well. The question at the back.
Paul Burgess from Cranfield University. Just want to make sort of one comment and then a question. So firstly, just to pick up Steve's point and Guy's point there about working and learning from European partners, it is excellent news this morning to hear about Horizon 2020 funding. We've been involved in various European projects. There's EU projects at present looking at branding of agroforestry. And it's great news this morning that UK partners can start leading that as well. So it's good to celebrate good news when that happens. My question, Guy, at the beginning, is you sort of mentioned that the vegetable price, the proportion farmers received, declined from 38% to 21%, or whatever. How is there a way of stopping it reducing further, or what sort of mechanisms are there to put farmers in more of a driving
Well, the only way I can say, I think it's about 25%. I actually got that figure just in case anyone's going to quote it from the British Fruit Growers Association publicity. It's hard to get an exact figure because it does depend on when you take. Is it when it comes off the tree, and is it when it? Anyway, I won't waste too much time to it. It's about 25 to 28% now, I'd say, for fruit and veg. And why does that keep on declining? It keeps on declining because, don't anyone kid yourself that what you pay for something is the fair price of production plus a little bit more to pay for investment. What you pay for something is what someone can get away with charging you, whether it's an iPhone, a pair of trainers, or the food that you buy in a supermarket. And eventually, if it gets so low, people will be driven out of production and the price will go up a bit, as it has done a little bit recently. But the answer to how do we stop that is honesty in the supply chain, I think. I think people do want to know how their food is produced, who it's produced by. I remember 30 years ago walking up a garden path and delivering my first veg box, having been told by a supermarket buyer when the phone went dead on me and I rang back and said, I think we were cut off. And he said, no, Sonny, when we whistle, you jump. The only question is how high. And, and that was my experience of selling food, was dealing with people like him. But actually, when I walked up and presented this, the woman who opened the door, she wanted to know what it tasted like. She wanted to know how it was produced. And it was, and life has been very different ever since. So that sort of honesty about where it comes from, not accepting this bullshit fake farms, which the supermarkets all do, not allowing someone to steal your brand. I mean, I would love to see the Good Law Project go onto that, but of course no one will say anything. I mean, David can't, because he'd be out of business. As he says, 80% of food is sold through these businesses that have the ability to behave in a morally abhorrent way, and we all just put up with it. And, I guess it's legal. I'm surprised by that. It's certainly immoral. And I know that I'm not going to persuade people to stop shopping in supermarkets, but I think we can pressurise our politicians to insist on a bit more honesty. I mean, it should be illegal to willfully mislead people, and that's what's happening, every day of the week with the way, Willow Farms, I can't even remember all the names of them. They all have, I think Tesco's now got 8 fake farms, Yeah. So honesty, transparency, traceability back to, people who, we have all the technology that, you could see how that egg is produced. We have to have traceability in supply chains. It's all very doable. But that would, of course, mean that a supermarket buyer, can't tell you how high to jump because, you might have a bit of power as the supplier of those eggs. And I've probably gone on enough. So.
No. And sorry.
Can I put my tuppence worth in there? I'm a little bit more optimistic, Guy. I've been dealing with major retailers for 30 years now, and you're right. For all of those 30 years, it's been cheaper next year than last year. And we as processors get squeezed, we as farmers get squeezed to a point where we're not making any money. There hasn't been eggs on shelves in retailers in the UK for the last 12 months, not in full quantities, because farmers just said, can't make money, bollocks to you, we're off. And stop providing food. You look at the NFU survey on dairy farms, and half of them's going to, a third of them is going to pack up in the next year. So I think the boot is going to get to some extent on the other foot. You look at discerning retailers now, and they're already starting to look at aligned supply because they realise it's not about food inflation, it's about getting product. There's options. You can put solar panels in your fields, you can put trees and trade carbon, as you say, in fields. You don't have to produce beef or whatever. So I think you'll very much see in the next couple of years aligned cost of production models where there's a guaranteed profit in there for the farmer. So there's hope.
I have a friend who is an engineer in the automotive industry, and he makes parts for several car manufacturers, and he says now that Toyota will send someone into his business to help him, and he does run a profitable business, to help him produce better car springs in his case. So there is another way to do business. It can be based on longer term trading relationships. I think we have been exposed in the food and farming industry to the most appalling behaviour, and I know the Grocery Code of Conduct has got rid of the most overt corruption, where you even had to pay for your buyer's whore if you were a supplier from Kenya. I mean, it literally was that sordid. There's less of that going on now, but it is now that everyone's pitching. I imagine, David, you pitch annually for this is only what happens with vegetables. And so there is a contract, but that has just become a mechanism, really, for driving the price down even lower. So the corruption has gone. It's just become a kind of institutionalised, I would say.
Very much so, but at the same time, like you say, yes, it was annually. Very transactional, short-term relationships. Not now. We're seeing 5-year contracts with aligned supply chains that...
Not yet with vegetables, but...
Well, maybe not. If you have enough of a shortage, all of a sudden you get people's attention. You know, the CEO at all of the big fours, first thing he does on a Monday morning is see if he's still got a job, and the second one is what line wasn't on the shelf. And somebody gets a rocket or fired if there was some lines not on the shelf for 2 weeks in a row. So that becomes hugely important to them.
That's really encouraging. That is
so shortage is what it needs to drive these long-term.
Question in the middle over here.
Yes. I'm Ulrich. I'm a professor at Coventry University, and I'm also in this... we had an earlier plug at 3 o'clock about research.
Yes.
And I'm also a customer of Riverford, and I like it. But I also expect it in a way from you. You know, I think organic has been a standard since 1991, and you know has not really developed so much or has stayed like that. So I think a farm like Riverford, I like what Guy is doing. I expect it in some way to improve organic, and agroforestry is one of the key things for me to do that. So the question I have for you is it not worth to kind of connect it to the organic brand itself? You know, it's a question for Helen and Guy, and not just to reinvent something new, but just to call it Organic Plus or something. You know, we've learned in the 30 years, we improved ourselves, so agroforestry should be an integral, almost mandatory part of organic. So that.
It's a really, really interesting point, and I think for me as an organic farmer, I've been an organic farmer for 38 years or something, agroforestry does feel like part of their next development, and that's one of the reasons I've been so keen on it. You know, a lot of the time in organic, we've been kind of converting what was an approach into an organic approach without fundamentally changing, in some cases, in some systems, the infrastructure and the design of the farm. And that's why, like Guy, I've been pulled towards some of the permaculture ideas. You know, how do you actually design a landscape that is both organic, but actually even more than that in so many ways? And so I think agroforestry and that whole sense of landscape design around the needs of people and the needs of nature and the needs of the climate is just really exciting. I don't think I'd want to kind of say, you know, at the moment I don't think there's any desire to kind of make it a compulsory element, but I think that, and we obviously want to make sure that everybody, all farmers, are starting to put more stuff into there. But I think it will just make common sense for organic farmers to embrace agroforestry as part of their resilience story. There's so much to go for. So yeah, but I think as an organic farmer, it's going to be hugely helpful.
Can I just make a comment on that? I think organic is virtually discredited by the fact that you continue to use sprays on fruit trees. So, talking to people, they're all using Bordeaux mixture full of copper salts, killing mycorrhiza. How can an organic movement allow that to happen?
So I think that
I think the future should be a no spray future, very clear on every label, on every product. And let's move away from organic and get something very clear like no spray.
So I think that organic orchards have been problematic, and I agree that there's been an over-reliance on some of those products, and that's in a way why we designed our agroforestry system in the way that we have, planting much more variety rather than the same products in the same area, really spacing out, so that gives us real opportunity to not do that. And so the whole system is designed within our organic approach, never to need to use any of those kind of copper sulfates or whatever it might be, because I agree we shouldn't be using them. So we need to design differently. We need to be designing our organic orchard systems fundamentally differently to make sure that we don't need to do that stuff. And we need, again, more help, more research to ensure that happens.
Guy, have you got any comment about it?
I'm slightly going to take issue with that. They don't, and no orchard that I know of, that, you're saying that it gets sprayed every week. You're kind of implying that it might get sprayed every week of the year. I have heard kind of 8 sprays as being the maximum, and I agree it's not perfect, but let's just be a bit careful with the language, because I did have a journalist tell me very authoritatively that we all used glyphosate the other day, and I just wanted to kill her, but anyway.
Don't do that, Guy.
The question about, organic and should it cast its, or seek to cast its kind of tent over this whole regen thing. And my God, I think it's a difficult question, and I feel for Helen having to, craft a response from the Soil Association. There is some form in this that, the Soil Association did try and have, social ethics. It tried to embrace the fair trade movement. It has, it got involved in the whole peak oil thing, years ago. And I have to say, I think all those things were mistakes. I mean, I think the most effective sort of lobbying groups has been the ones that have been focused. And I would take, there are very few examples of where consumer pressure has led to significant change, because, the greenwash or, just gets in the way. And these, but I would say that free-range eggs are one where it has brought about very positive changes, and now it seems. I wanted to ask you, did you say it was 18 or 80% of the market was free? 80 is free range. I mean, that is extraordinary, so that. But there are very few examples like that. That is a very focused one. So, I think that I'm not quite sure about this at the Soil Association, should stay focused. I think this regen thing has just got out of the bag, and any chance that you're going to cast a net over it and capture it, I think that one's gone personally. And I don't know what's going to happen to it, because I think the whole regen thing, someone who is doing agroforestry in a very agroecological way is turned under the same regen bracket as someone supplying Unilever and spraying glyphosate and farming in a very conventional way but not ploughing. I just don't understand how that can all come. Organic. We know what the organic standards are. There are legally enforceable standards. There are regen brands out there which haven't, and I think could easily have been discredited. I don't know whether the organic industry should just wait for, if regen doesn't get more specific about what it stands for, it is going to be discredited, I think. I'm sorry, I don't have no answers for that question, really. I think it's incredibly
We
difficult.
enjoyed it. I think we've got about 5 minutes left or so. Question?
Yeah, the idea of needing to spray trees every week sounds as if you've got the wrong sort of trees, wrong sort of production system altogether. I mean, the problem is that there's an over-reliance on traditional varieties. If you take apples, for example, where the cheapest option, I suppose the simplest option has been to spray. The main problem is it takes a long time to develop scab, say, or resistant varieties. But this is the issue, is that there's a lot of traditional varieties that are there. Obviously, they don't have all the optimum characteristics for supermarket apples this day. But people like in Switzerland, they've been working on this for some time. And it is a slow process for developing varieties that are acceptable, possibly in due season. And there's also a move to market them in a different way, in that you don't market it by variety, but you have by flavour, and then you substitute the next variety that comes along that's in that flavour category that's ripe at that time. And then, in terms of management, obviously there's clever things, going back to chickens, for managing insects that damage nut crops by combining the two together.
Thank you. Helen, you had a comment, I think.
Well, only just to follow up on that in terms of varieties, and just to be clear, we haven't used a spray on this farm for 35 years, and none of the farms that I'm working with are using these things. But the varieties, I think there again, we've really experimented with lots and lots of different varieties, older varieties here. We're working with Brogdale and bringing some of those kind of things in. And again, it's one of those areas where we just need, again, more and more information, and we need to focus in agroforestry systems so much, and we haven't mentioned it once today, apart from about nuts, on taste. And, you know, I think the reason that most of our kids don't really relish their, you know, fruit and veg when they get the chance to eat it is that none of it tastes very nice. And yet in the right organic systems and the right agroforestry systems, we can produce the most amazing flavours and offer something that supermarkets are never going to offer. So I think there's real opportunity in all of that to be reinvigorating, as well as, you know, getting over some of our technical problems, actually reinvigorating the market with unbelievably good tasting product.
Once you eat Guy's nuts, you never go back. That thing. Sorry, I didn't mean that to sound quite as weird as it did. Walnuts. Well, massive. I'll stop immediately. Helen Browning, David Brass, Guy Singh Watson, who stood in for the nut guy. Thank you very much for coming after a hot and heavy night last night for us and everybody else. And thank you for being such a dynamic audience.
Thank you for listening. We'd like to thank our lead sponsor, Sainsbury's, and our other major sponsors, Farmers Weekly Transition, Forestry Commission, and Till Hill, and all the attendees for making this show such an overwhelming success. To get advice and support for your agroforestry project, either visit woodlandtrust.org.uk/plant or soilassociation.org/agroforestry.